Marcus Thompson adjusted his worn leather jacket as he approached the airline counter at Dallas International Airport. The Silver Star medal in his pocket felt heavier than usual today. At 62 years old, the retired Army sergeant carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had served his country for 25 years before a roadside bomb in Afghanistan changed everything. The young airline employee behind the counter barely looked up from her computer screen as Marcus handed over his boarding pass. She scanned it quickly, her expression shifting from boredom to mild confusion. "Sir, there seems to be an issue with your seat assignment," she said, her voice lacking any warmth. "You were originally in first class, but I'm showing you've been moved to economy." Marcus frowned, pulling out his phone to check his confirmation email. "That can't be right. I specifically requested the first-class upgrade when I booked this flight to attend my granddaughter's wedding in Seattle. I used my military discount and saved for months to afford it." The employee shrugged, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced indifference. "I'm sorry, but the system shows you've been downgraded. Apparently, we had some VIP passengers who needed those seats at the last minute. Company policy allows us to move passengers when necessary." "VIP passengers?" Marcus asked, his voice remaining steady despite the frustration building inside him. "I'm a disabled veteran. I have metal in my left leg from an IED explosion. Those first-class seats have more leg room, which I specifically need for medical reasons." The young woman's eyes briefly flickered to Marcus's slight limp, but her expression remained unchanged. "Sir, I understand your situation, but my hands are tied. The passengers who took those seats are very important clients of the airline. I can offer you a $50 voucher for future travel." Marcus felt the familiar ache in his leg intensify as he shifted his weight. The long flight to Seattle would be agony in the cramped economy seats, but he had no choice. His granddaughter Emma had specifically asked him to walk her down the aisle since her father had passed away 3 years earlier. Nothing would keep him from being there for her special day. "Fine," Marcus said quietly, accepting the new boarding pass. "Gate B12? "That's correct, sir. Boarding begins in 30 minutes. As Marcus made his way through the busy terminal, he couldn't shake the feeling of being dismissed and forgotten. This wasn't the first time his service had been overlooked, but it still stung. He found a quiet corner near his gate and carefully lowered himself into a chair, massaging his aching leg. Other passengers began gathering around the gate area. Marcus noticed a group of well-dressed business executives talking loudly about their upcoming golf tournament in Seattle. One of them mentioned how easy it had been to upgrade their seats at the last minute, laughing about how the airline always takes care of their platinum members. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about Emma. She had been so excited when he confirmed he would be at her wedding. After losing her father in a car accident, Marcus had stepped up to fill that void in her life. She was studying to become a nurse, inspired by the stories Marcus had told her about the medics who saved his life in Afghanistan. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin boarding Flight 447 to Seattle. First-class passengers and our platinum members may board at this time." Marcus watched as the group of business executives strutted toward the gate, their expensive suits and confident demeanor marking them as the VIPs who had taken his seat. He recognized one of them as the CEO of a tech company he had seen on television, someone who had never worn a uniform or served anything but his own interests. When economy boarding was finally announced, Marcus joined the long line of passengers shuffling toward the aircraft. The narrow aisle of the plane felt even more confining than usual, and he struggled to maneuver his stiff leg past other passengers struggling to stow their luggage. His assigned seat was in the very back of the plane, middle seat in a row of 3. The passenger in the window seat was already asleep, and the aisle seat was occupied by a large man who barely acknowledged Marcus's presence. As Marcus tried to squeeze into the cramped space, pain shot through his injured leg. The flight attendant noticed his struggle, but seemed more annoyed than sympathetic. Sir, you need to take your seat quickly. We're trying to stay on schedule. Marcus gritted his teeth and forced himself into the uncomfortable seat. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him, and he knew the 4-hour flight would be torture. He pulled out his phone to send a quick text to Emma, letting her know he was on his way. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus tried to find a comfortable position. The businessman in first class were probably already being served champagne and offered warm towels. Meanwhile, he was trapped in a space barely big enough for a child, his service to his country apparently worth nothing more than a $50 voucher. The engines roared to life, and Marcus felt the familiar sensation of the aircraft beginning to taxi toward the runway. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on Emma's smiling face, reminding himself that this discomfort was temporary. In a few hours, he would be holding his granddaughter in his arms, ready to walk her down the aisle, just as he had promised. But as the plane continued its slow progress toward takeoff, Marcus had no idea that someone else on the aircraft was about to change everything. In first class, a man in a crisp military uniform was reviewing passenger manifests on his tablet, his trained eye catching something that would soon turn this routine flight into something extraordinary. The plane came to an unexpected stop on the tarmac, engines still running but no longer moving toward the runway. Confused murmurs rippled through the cabin as passengers wondered what was causing the delay. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his cramped seat, the pain in his leg intensifying with each passing minute. Over the intercom, the captain's voice crackled with uncertainty. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated while we resolve a minor issue. We'll be airborne shortly." None of the passengers, including Marcus, could have imagined that this minor issue was about to completely transform the flight and restore a veteran's dignity in the most unexpected way possible. General Robert Hayes finished reviewing the passenger manifest on his tablet and frowned deeply. The 4-star general had been traveling in civilian clothes to maintain a low profile during his journey to a classified military briefing in Seattle. His sharp eyes had caught something that made his blood boil with righteous anger. The name Marcus Thompson, Silver Star recipient, appeared on the list, but his seat assignment showed economy class. General Hayes knew that name well. He had personally recommended Marcus for the Silver Star after reading the detailed report of his heroic actions in Afghanistan. Marcus had single-handedly saved 6 wounded soldiers during a Taliban ambush, dragging them to safety despite his own severe injuries. General Hayes quietly approached the senior flight attendant, his jaw set with determination. "I need to speak with your captain immediately. This is a matter of military importance." The flight attendant, recognizing the authority in his voice despite his civilian attire, quickly escorted him to the cockpit. Captain Sarah Mitchell looked up as the general entered, noting his military bearing even in his casual clothes. "Captain, I'm General Robert Hayes, United States Army," he said, showing his military identification. "I need this aircraft to return to the gate immediately." Captain Mitchell's eyes widened as she recognized the 4-star general's rank. "Sir, is there a security threat? Should I alert airport security?" "No security threat, Captain, but there's been a grave injustice committed against one of America's finest heroes, and I intend to correct it personally." The general's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I need you to announce that we're returning to the gate due to a VIP passenger requirement." Meanwhile, back in the economy section, Marcus continued to endure the cramped conditions. His leg was throbbing now, and he wondered how he would manage the long flight. The passenger next to him had fallen asleep and was snoring loudly, while the man in the aisle seat was taking up more space than his fair share. The plane began moving again, but instead of heading toward the runway, it was clearly returning to the terminal. Confused conversations broke out among the passengers as everyone wondered what was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the announcement over the intercom. We are returning to the gate to accommodate a very important passenger situation. We apologize for any inconvenience and appreciate your patience. In the first-class section, the business executives who had taken Marcus's original seats began complaining loudly about the delay. The tech CEO pulled out his phone and began making angry calls to his assistant, demanding that someone fix this situation immediately. "I have a very important meeting in Seattle," he declared to anyone who would listen. "This airline needs to understand that my time is valuable. I'm going to make sure heads roll for this incompetence." As the aircraft pulled up to the gate, General Hayes prepared for what he was about to do. He had spent 40 years in the military, rising through the ranks by always standing up for his soldiers. Today, he would stand up for a veteran who had already given more than his fair share for his country. The moment the seatbelt sign was turned off, General Hayes stood and made his way through the first-class cabin toward the economy section. His purposeful stride and commanding presence caused conversations to stop as passengers wondered who this important man might be. Marcus was struggling to stand up from his cramped seat when he noticed a distinguished-looking man in his 60s approaching down the aisle. Something about the man's bearing reminded Marcus of his commanding officers from his military days. "Sergeant Marcus Thompson?" the general asked, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. Marcus straightened instinctively, recognizing the tone of a superior officer even though both men were in civilian clothes. "Yes, sir." "I'm General Robert Hayes, United States Army. I had the honor of recommending you for the Silver Star after your actions in Afghanistan." The general's voice grew louder, ensuring that nearby passengers could hear every word. "I understand you've been subjected to unacceptable treatment by this airline." A hush fell over the surrounding passengers as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus felt his eyes welling up with emotion as he recognized the general's name from his award ceremony. "Sir, I don't understand," Marcus stammered, overwhelmed by the unexpected encounter. General Hayes turned to address the nearby passengers, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded thousands of soldiers. "This man," he said, pointing to Marcus, "saved 6 American soldiers under enemy fire in Afghanistan. He dragged wounded men to safety while suffering from his own severe injuries from an IED explosion. He was awarded the Silver Star for his valor and heroism." The business executives from first class had followed the commotion and were now listening from the aisle, their earlier complaints forgotten in the face of this dramatic revelation. "This hero," General Hayes continued, his voice rising with controlled anger, "was downgraded from first class to accommodate passengers who have never served their country, never put their lives on the line for freedom, and apparently believe their golf games are more important than honoring our veterans." Marcus felt the stares of every passenger around him, but instead of the dismissive looks he had grown accustomed to, he saw respect and admiration in their eyes. Several passengers began to applaud, and the sound grew throughout the cabin. The tech CEO, who had been complaining about the delay, stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. "General, I had no idea. If I had known—" "You shouldn't need to know," General Hayes cut him off sharply. "Every veteran deserves respect and courtesy, regardless of their specific service record. But this particular veteran has earned his place at the front of any aircraft in America." The general turned back to Marcus, his expression softening. "Sergeant Thompson, would you do me the honor of accepting an upgrade to first class? In fact, I insist that you take my seat. It would be my privilege to serve you for once, instead of the other way around." Marcus was speechless, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. Around him, passengers were nodding in approval, and several called out words of support and gratitude for his service. The senior flight attendant, who had been watching the entire exchange, quickly stepped forward. "General Hayes, sir, we can certainly arrange better seating for Sergeant Thompson. Let me escort both of you to first class immediately." As Marcus gathered his few belongings, Passengers throughout the economy section stood and began applauding again. A young mother with 2 small children approached him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for your service, sir," she said quietly. "My husband is deployed overseas right now, and knowing there are heroes like you watching over our soldiers means everything to me." Marcus nodded, too emotional to speak. As he followed General Hayes toward the front of the plane, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the profound respect and gratitude of his fellow Americans. The pain in his leg seemed less important now, overshadowed by the warmth spreading through his chest. But this was only the beginning of what would become the most memorable flight of Marcus Thompson's life. As they moved toward first class, General Hayes was already planning how to ensure that this veteran would never again be treated as anything less than the hero he truly was. As Marcus settled into the spacious first-class seat that General Hayes had insisted he take, he could hardly believe what was happening. The leather seat was incredibly comfortable, with plenty of room for his injured leg to stretch out. For the first time in hours, the constant pain began to ease. General Hayes took a seat across the aisle, declining the flight attendant's offer to find him alternative first-class accommodation. "I've slept in foxholes and desert tents, young lady. Any seat on this aircraft is luxury compared to that." The business executives who had originally taken Marcus's seat were now seated in economy, having voluntarily given up their spots without a single complaint. The tech CEO had even approached Marcus personally to apologize and shake his hand, expressing genuine remorse for his earlier behavior. As the flight finally prepared for takeoff, the senior flight attendant made an unprecedented announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honor of having a true American hero aboard our flight today. Sergeant Marcus Thompson, a Silver Star recipient, will be our guest of honor. His brave actions in Afghanistan saved the lives of 6 fellow soldiers, and we are privileged to serve him today." The entire cabin erupted in applause that continued for several minutes. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as passengers throughout the plane turned to acknowledge him with grateful smiles and respectful nods. It was a moment of recognition he had never expected and would never forget. During the flight, General Hayes shared stories of his own military career and asked Marcus about his experiences. They talked about their mutual respect for the soldiers who never made it home and their shared commitment to honoring their memory through service to others. "You know, Marcus," the general said as they flew over the Rocky Mountains, "what happened today shouldn't have been necessary. Veterans like you should never have to prove their worth or fight for basic respect. But I'm glad I was here to witness your dignity in the face of that treatment." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "General, with all due respect, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. A lot of veterans feel invisible these days. We come home changed. And sometimes it feels like the country we fought for has moved on without us." "That's exactly why what happened today matters," General Hayes replied firmly. "Every person on this flight will remember this moment. They'll think twice before dismissing someone who might be a veteran. Sometimes change happens one person at a time, one moment at a time." The flight attendants treated Marcus like royalty throughout the journey. They brought him the finest meal options, ensured his drink was always full, and checked on his comfort regularly. Other passengers stopped by his seat to thank him for his service and ask about his experiences. A young college student named Jake spent almost an hour talking with Marcus about his grandfather who had served in Vietnam. "My grandpa never talked much about his service," Jake confided. "But hearing your story helps me understand what he might have gone through. Thank you for helping me see him differently." An elderly couple from Minnesota shared that their son was currently deployed in the Middle East. "Knowing there are people like you watching out for our boy gives us so much peace," the woman said through tears. "You're all heroes to us." As they began their descent into Seattle, Marcus realized that this experience had changed something fundamental inside him. For years he had carried the weight of feeling forgotten and undervalued. Today, surrounded by the respect and gratitude of strangers who had become friends, that burden began to lift. General Hayes pulled out his business card and handed it to Marcus. "I meant what I said about staying in touch. I'm working on several veteran support initiatives, and I could use someone with your experience and perspective. Would you consider helping me improve how our country treats its returning heroes?" Marcus looked at the card with amazement. "Sir, I would be honored to help in any way I can." "There's something else," the general continued with a slight smile. "I've already made some calls during our flight. The CEO of this airline will be receiving a very detailed report about what happened today, along with my strong recommendations for improving their treatment of military passengers. I have a feeling their policies are about to change significantly." As the plane touched down in Seattle, the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we taxi to the gate, please remain seated to allow our honored guest, Sergeant Thompson, to disembark first. It has been our privilege to serve him today." When Marcus stood to leave, the entire cabin erupted in applause once again. Passengers lined the aisles to shake his hand and offer personal thanks. The young mother with the deployed husband hugged him tightly and whispered, "Please tell your granddaughter she's lucky to have such an incredible grandfather." At the gate, Marcus found Emma waiting for him with tears of joy in her eyes. She had received his text about the delay, but knew nothing about what had transpired during the flight. "Grandpa," she called out, running to embrace him. "I was so worried about the delay. How was your flight?" Marcus hugged his granddaughter tightly, breathing in her familiar scent and feeling overwhelming gratitude for this moment. "Emma, sweetheart, it was the most incredible flight of my life." As he began to tell her about General Hayes and the extraordinary events that had unfolded, Marcus realized that this experience would become a story he would share for the rest of his life. More importantly, it had reminded him that his service mattered, that his sacrifice had meaning, and that there were still people who understood the true cost of freedom. General Hayes approached them before leaving the gate. "You must be Emma," he said with a warm smile. "Your grandfather has told me so much about you and your upcoming wedding. It's an honor to meet the young woman who inspired a hero to make this journey." Emma looked confused but delighted as the general explained who he was and what had happened on the flight. Her pride in her grandfather shone brightly as she learned about the respect and recognition he had received. "General Hayes," Emma said with tears in her eyes, "thank you for making sure my grandfather was treated the way he deserves. He's the most amazing man I know, and I'm so grateful that others got to see that today." As they walked through the airport together, Marcus felt a lightness in his step that had nothing to do with his injured leg. The pain was still there, but it was overshadowed by something much more powerful: the knowledge that his service had been recognized, his dignity restored, and his worth affirmed by people who understood the true meaning of sacrifice. 2 days later, as Marcus walked his beloved granddaughter down the aisle, he thought about the unexpected journey that had brought him to this perfect moment. Sometimes, he reflected, life has a way of reminding us that heroes come in all forms, and that standing up for what's right can transform not just individual lives, but the hearts and minds of everyone who witnesses true courage in action. The wedding was beautiful, but for Marcus, the most meaningful part of the weekend had already happened at 30,000 feet above the American landscape, where a 4-star general had reminded an entire airplane full of people about the debt of gratitude owed to those who served. It was a reminder that would ripple outward, touching countless other lives in ways that Marcus would never fully know but would always treasure.